So welcome, everyone. Thank you for participating in this year's Perennial Farm Gathering, and welcome to It Isn't a Recipe, Agroforestry, Agroecology, and Permaculture Design session. Our moderator for this session is going to be the awesome Jenn Ripp, who is Savanna Institute's agroforestry educator in Iowa, and who also played a huge role in coordinating this PFG and bringing us all together. Please take it away, Jenn.
Thank you, Sinuan. I really appreciate that very kind introduction. And I wanted to start off by thanking these three amazing panelists that we have here, and maybe doing a little background work as to the name of this session. So welcome to everyone. It's a recipe. It isn't a recipe, agroforestry, agroecology, and permaculture design. I've so thoroughly enjoyed the conversation we've had in creating this discussion. We've been able to meet a couple times, and I feel like I've really gotten to know the panelists here and just how they approach this work. While this started out as a how-to panel of sorts, all of us realized that there was so much more to discuss than GIS maps, although no harsh to GIS maps. We've each entered this work from different pathways, and the session by no means aims to reduce these terms down to being the same. They are not the same. They have different origins completely. Many of you will identify with one, two, or all three of these terms: agroforestry, agroecology, and permaculture. No matter which philosophy brought you here, I'm really glad that you're here. The process of designing perennial systems can be approached by many names and many angles. But there's more in common with these phrases than they are uncommon. We are all thoughtful and carefully planning for our futures and generations to come with the work that we do. And we're all here because we believe in an earth-centered, holistic approach to agriculture. And now I'm going to stop talking because I want these three lovely people to be able to talk as much as we can and to have as much time for questions for them at the end as we can. So the first question I'm going to ask is for you all to introduce yourself and give us a little background on who you are, what places you in this work, and what you'd like to share today. So, Tonia, take it away.
All right, Jen, should I share my screen now as well?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right, everybody, you should start seeing the preview here of the PDF. Please confirm you see this.
Confirmed.
Awesome. So, hey, everyone, I am Tonia Andreina. It's so great to meet you. I'm a TSP, a technical service provider with Savanna Institute, and I also own and operate my own design build company called Earth Mama Design. And much like the theme of our workshop today, my background is meandering and not a true recipe. So to quickly go through some of that, I'm going to share my portfolio with you. And you don't need to feel like you need to absorb everything in here, but it's just something for you to look at while I'm quickly speaking about my history. So what got me into agroforestry so much was really this project right here you see, which Site Design actually did the plan of. And this is a participatorily designed community garden space featuring woody tree crops and other edible perennials in the far north side community of Rogers Park. And so I spent 10 years doing environmental education with kids around skill transfer training for food production specifically. And these are some of the amazing kids that I had the opportunity to work with in that experience. But kind of like fast forwarding through that world of nonprofits and working in skill transfer training, some of that skill was related to taking GIS files, like Jen just mentioned, shape files, all these mapping softwares, and really turning data into something that's usable for the purposes of this perennial agriculture, right? And so you can see here an experience that happened last year in collaboration with Savanna Institute. They were a funding partner in this internship experience that I had with Black Oak Center in the rare Black Oak Savanna remnant, here where I stand at my newly purchased property that I'm very thankful for, in this rare, biocultural remnant that was actually established by Indigenous folks back in the day. And speaking of that skill transfer training related to the Savanna, you can see how some of that specific agroforestry work as it relates to this biocultural remnant that was facilitated by Indigenous folks is now being reframed through a more production style lens. And, I've learned a lot since producing these particular graphics. So if you're wondering why is everything in a plus sign here, don't worry about it. It was a quadrant model. But point being, we're really trying to bridge the gap here in my work and in our work as a whole, I think, as a community, but in my work graphically. So a lot of my agroforestry contributions have been around planning and supporting other folks currently in my design business, as you start to see some of my work of here, and as my role as a technical service provider with SI. And so Earth Mama Design, this is some of my smaller scale work that I've done, very residential. On the other side of this fence is an alley, like literally, right? Some clients really most clients come to me because they want to plant pretty things that are also really good for the butterflies and bees. And so I'm kind of that person that people reach out to for that. And increasingly so, I'm working to integrate tree crops in these designs because of everybody here and what we understand about the benefits of this stuff, right? And just wanted to show you these graphics to kind of preface some of our talk today, because multifunctional polyculture, permaculture, all these terms, right? We can call it what we want, but there's different benefits that different audiences will pick up on. Here you have something about social engagement in a city, all centering with trees. Whereas in this example, it's over here, I've classified an existing landscape by what might be understood as its current ecological profile. Is it already an evergreen woodland, or could it be? That's part of the design intervention when thinking about things ecologically as well. And so, here's some of those habitat breakdowns. How can we use biomimicry and these ecological, replication kind of models to also be productive for food crop purposes, and make maps like this that show habitat ranges for rare and endangered species? How can we transform those into practically productive models that allow us to actually plant in such a way by habitat that simultaneously produces field results? And something I just want to quickly mention before I wrap here is that, part of what I think brings a lot of people into and turns people off from these sorts of planting designs is the complexity, because it's so beautiful how you can bring so much to it and all these different perspectives. And it's also so wonderful how the takeaway can be so almost serenely beautiful, right? Just, fruit, nuts on a tree, on a plant. There's something so simple in that makes it so beautiful. So I think something else in my work I try to do, and I hope I can do for you all in some way, shape, or form throughout this, is inspire folks to be more maybe centered in that we all, we can be deeply complicated, but we can all be deeply, simply, productively abundant as well. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation for my introduction. And thanks everybody for your attention. I'm really grateful to be here with such beautiful co-panelists and participants.
Thank you, Tonia. Thank you, Tonia. I take back everything I said about GIS. Those are beautiful maps. And again, everything has a place. And I'll remind everyone to make sure you're staying muted in the audience too. So next we have Emilie Tweardy. Please take it away.
All right. Whoa, what's happening? Come on now. Oh, that's not right. Are you still seeing the slideshow?
Yep, it's just not presenting.
Now? Okay. Okay.
You're good. You're good. Looks great.
Hello. I'm Emilie Tweardy. Thanks for having me. It's been really awesome. I guess maybe I'll have a different view after tonight, but I will say so far the best part of this has been getting to know my fellow panelists. This has been a really fun session to prep for, and probably for me, like my favorite, most rewarding part of my work is just the connections with people and just seeing how interconnected we all are. So I've been really enjoying it. So thanks. Again, hello. I am an agroforester, I'm a farmer, I'm a permaculture educator. These three logos are like my three main hustles, if you will. I work part-time as an agroforester for Appalachian Sustainable Development. I'll talk more about them in a minute, but we're a nonprofit based in Southwestern Virginia. I've been around for 25 years, sort of began as a organization of interested parties trying to figure out, like, post-coal Appalachia, what's next, right? So so much programming, all based on growing food and connectedness to the land. So really, really great stuff. And there are a few other ASD folks presenting through the gathering. So I hope you'll tune in and see some of those folks. Shire Folk Farm is the farm that my husband and I own and operate here in Central Virginia. I'm in Fluvanna County, Virginia, which is south of Charlottesville a little bit, like 2.5 hours south of DC. And then Shenandoah Permaculture Institute is based in the Blue Ridge here. I've been teaching with SPI for 8 years, I think, and practicing permaculture for, I don't know, 10-ish, something like that. So just to explore those a little further, for my work with ASD, I'm mostly focused in silvopasture, although, you know, since we're a nonprofit, like I'm grant funded, I have specific things that I can work on throughout that. And those things are silvopasture, alley cropping, and forest farming. And so I'm mostly working in silvopasture, but there are 3 sort of main programs that are main parts of the programming that I'm doing. One is just technical and financial assistance. So helping people figure out tree species and spatial arrangements and implementation timelines and all that kind of stuff for silvopasture projects and other agroforestry projects. And then also helping people sort of navigate the grant funding around that world. And anyone who's paying attention to agroforestry right now, and especially silvopasture, there's so much money. So that's increasingly a big part of what we're up to. I also host a webinar series called Ask an Agroforester. These are all free on YouTube. You can go check them out. We got word recently that we are funded for another 2 years of that series. So that's really exciting. And we're getting the winter lineup put together now. And then with Savanna Institute, of course, the agroforestry trainings for natural resources professionals, or AFTNERP, if anyone wants to help me get that acronym off the ground. No one seems interested. But through the AFTNERP program, there is a series of courses, workshops, farm tours. You can find them on learnagroforestry.com. That's where the courses are hosted. There's some free ones. There's some that are pay to play, but they're a really good deal. And they're all geared at teaching agroforestry to folks who are working with the public. So all these TSPs, technical service providers, natural resources professionals, these are the people that we want to get like the detailed information to so that it can then be disseminated to the public and we can advance agroforestry. In my home farm life, Shire Folk Farm has been around for, I think we're on our 8th year this year. These are just some pictures of a silvopasture implementation we did in 2020 and a few photos as it's coming along. We have done a little bit of a lot of things: market gardening, certified naturally grown stuff, mushroom production. We do mostly pastured protein these days. Sheep and poultry are our main hustles. We've done laying hens, meat broilers, turkeys, ducks, all kinds of stuff. But we're really narrowing down to mostly sheep and holiday turkey. And over here at SPI, we teach a couple different permaculture courses every year. We teach a PDC in the spring and in the fall. Our spring course is at the University of Richmond. Our fall course is up in the Blue Ridge. And if you're not familiar with permaculture, it's one of those tricky things to define, because if you ask anybody, everybody has a different definition. For me, I'll say that I always refer to it as a design science, an ethics-based design science that models nature and tries to benefit the whole system. So there's all kinds of ethics, principles, et cetera, that go into that. I will say, if you're on the fence about permaculture and you're listening to people that are shouting about how it's chicken tractors or it's a food forest, like those things, that's not permaculture. Doesn't mean it's not under the umbrella or in the world of permaculture, but permaculture really is at its heart design. And design, good design at its heart, is based in observation and interaction. So that's my quick elevator spiel about that. And then just kind of in my heart right now, I'm really moving towards nursery work and agroforestry on the farm, really trying to transition away from all our like high rotation poultry, high rotation vegetables. We're no longer interested in producing CNG baby cut salad greens and flats and flats and flats of tomatoes. Like, I want to listen to a podcast and take cuttings of elderberry. So that's me in a nutshell right now. And thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Emilie. That was excellent. And then next we have Nance Klehm up, and I will be sharing my screen, and Nancy will be giving me the cues of when to go. I'm just gonna.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start right now because it's not needed for a screen. I'm a fifth generation horticulturalist. I grew up on 500 acre tree, shrub, and perennial nursery. And I ran an ecological landscaping business for 17 years. And then for the past 15 or so, I've been working in ecological systems design. And as a consultant with social ecologies, mostly in the fields of soils, although that branches into larger landscape. I still do design work, but not as much as I'm interested in working with landscapes that people are living with, and how do they not work them over, but how do they work them so it actually fits their capacities and skills and time. So I live in the Driftless and also live in Chicago, and I travel weekly between the two, which is truly bicultural in many ways. And I've lived at Pachacamac and worked here for 10 years. Next. Beep.
What?
I can see the next one.
So there's several main elements in this land that helped me kind of guide and support a lot of what I do here. And I literally arrived and like, what am I going to do here? And I had some ideas I threw at the wall right away because I do have a really long practice and a lot of skills. And a lot of those things backfired on me, which I was surprised at. But it's always a humble lesson. No matter how skilled you are, when you meet a piece of land, the land is going to let you know what can happen. So the two main elements are these wooded areas. One's a woodlot, and one is a broader wooded area. And those have spurred some practices. Next. And so one of the things I have been working on for, I don't know, maybe 12 years is cultivation of mushrooms. So shiitake, nameko, oyster, and reishi are the ones that I have settled on. Oysters are really easy, and I'll fall back to them just because, but shiitakes are my faves. Next. I have 3 orchard areas, and I've been developing further of these areas. They started with some older plantings from the former owner of this property, and I have kind of been planting into them and diversifying them. Essentially, I'm designing for habitat, biodiversity, and legacy. And I think that provisioning follows that, and I'm not really worried about it. Abundance just kind of happens if you have all those other things in mind. Next. The other main element that directs me is the prairie. The prairie was put in 1980. As was the woodlot. And this prairie is highly encroached upon by reed canary grass since it dips into a wetland. And I do a fair amount of management on this and kind of not trying to wipe out the reed canary grass, but keeping it at bay by holding the line of native plants strong. Next. And so one of the things I do is I do a lot of propagation of native species. Now, this is coming from the nuts and seeds from the woody species, but also the perennial the plants in the prairie. So I do a lot of propagation and planting out in back into the land, but also there could be sales, and there's other ways of sharing these plants. Next. I also have a kitchen garden. I grow various things in that, and I want to concentrate on seed because seed has been my focus for the past 30 years, and I'm really interested in what we're doing with seed right now. Next. And so I grow a lot for seed, and I've been collecting seed and all non-commercial varieties of seed. And I'm a self-proclaimed bean freak, but I also love corn. And so I do grow some corn, although that provides some tricky business since I live in Northwest Illinois in a sea of corn and soy all around me. So corn is something that takes a little bit more effort. Beans, I rock tens and tens of varieties every year for seed, and I give it back. I work with some birds and bees. Those numbers are the numbers I try to keep it at. That's about what I can handle. There's something about being one person and only having so much capacity I'm going to say of all these different creatures, I've been working with bobwhite quail for over 20 years. Cayuga ducks less time, probably 3 years, bees about 10, and chickens almost my whole life. Next. So soil building, very central to social ecologies and what we do. This you'll see here, this is a new Kontiki, but I also do pit fires. I work with retort and some other technologies. But when I'm doing old mushrooms logs or something, I throw them in the Kontiki. Yeah, we can talk about this. Soil building accepts all the waste. I'm all about it. And I also design for social elements because I don't want to do this alone. And there's a lot of reasons to invite people onto the property that's not just about work and learning about systems. And so I have a lot of things going on that I think are really attractive to other people. And I run a residency where people get to spend time on land, doing whatever creative thinking or making work that they're doing as they live amongst integrated systems. Next. One of the things I do want to talk about when I do design work, I do a lot of different kind of things myself. And so I usually go out to land for half a day or 2 days on site and spend a lot of time wandering around, making a lot of notes, and then working those up for my clients. We can share these later. I just want you to get a sense of what I do. Next. And when I work with clients, so many people are, whoop, go back, Jen. When I work with clients, a lot of things that I find is that they come with so many ideas, so many ideas that they've come through a design course or other people have been talking about, and it's very heady, and they're working things up into this, particular way, and they're all stuck in their head about it. And I try to ask them about really what they can live with and what they want to live with over time. And then I think something's getting cut off at the end. Do you see it? I think I can just say the last question is, I usually ask the question is, and what do you want to pass on to the next caretakers, what is your legacy on this place? Because I always believe in addressing the end game. Next. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much. So now that we have a little bit of grounding in how you are each approaching this work, I also want to point out how cool it is that you each have these feet in each door of this kind of design-based practice where you're working with clients, and then a lot of times it's a nonprofit, as the case with Tonia and Emilie, and like you kind of have this perspective then on the people that you're talking with. So that brings me to my first question, which Nancy kind of started answering for us already, but one of the most interesting questions that I found in our pre-meetings was, how do you approach designing with clients? Nancy, you mentioned everyone is kind of all up in their heads. How do you get them to focus on what you, in your experience, is important? If you want to start out with us.
Well, a lot of times I usually ask for some tea, and I get a chance to look at their house and meet their animals. And I've already spent some time walking around already. So I can have that experience in place and make notes of what I see is happening before they start reporting on it, because the reportage and what I'm seeing can be quite different. And so even when I was doing ecological design in the cities, I'd always ask for that too, because I'd have to get a sense of their tastes and their habits and, certain aesthetics and sensibilities. And so I always do want to be on the land first, when I can just really absorb it, not from necessarily a thinking place, but from an experience place, and have that with me when I start talking to them, and then walk on the land with them and hear them talk about it, hear what their ideas are, and then really what's happening on the ground, and just start showing that there's a tension, or maybe there's some space between those things, and how much can actually come together, or do you really need to come together, and how much are you just kind of maybe getting distracted as opposed to really dealing with what's in place. So really having that kind of long walking, talking piece is important after I've spent a lot of time with them, time on the land before that even happens. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of trying to rectify the difference between these expectations that you can get from doing a lot of internet research and books, and then like the actual realities. Tonia or Emilie, would you like to chime in with that?
Yeah, I guess a lot of what Nancy said, and as it relates to the TSP program here at Savanna Institute, just to give a quick shout out for people who might be considering, applying or seeing if that's a good fit. Basically, our process, it mirrors the NRCS 9-step process. And without going through each of those, the main nuts and bolts of it are a lot of what Nancy said about the site visit and understanding the client goals, right? And then we go into analyzing the data. So what are your goals, but how does that mesh with your soil types? And we have a whole, tree crop selection tool that we actually use in that process to give, people who own land, clients, a good chance at success with these plans, right? Because not every tree wants to grow in every soil condition, drainage class, etc. So once we get through that phase and we, actually place the plants where they're going to be physically in the landscape, which each TSP has their own, smaller details as to how they get there, their own process. But we do a lot of, zone blocking off and stuff, and then determining the species that make most sense based on factors previously mentioned. And something specifically I'll say that's really seeming to be a theme in my work with clients this cycle, which it's my first cycle as a TSP at Savanna Institute. But outside of, my other more residential scale design work you all saw earlier, if you were around for the introductions, the theme in the client work these days, it's how to bridge three main topics. And this will come up later in a future question, I think, for us. But it's really about not only the client goals, but how are the markets and the ecosystems, because all of my clients this round, which is great, and maybe why Matt put those people with me, partly, I don't know, but they all seem to be really interested in fostering these ecosystems. And I think our larger TSP group of clients that we're servicing, seem to have a lot of those goals. So how do we make ecosystem services or biomimicry or whatever match with the markets and the real life money that we need to see as landowners, as people out there with bills to pay and trees that can potentially, meet those? We need to be strategic about it, though. And with that, I want to make sure Emilie has time to answer that question herself.
Yeah, that's all really great. And I love hearing about that, the market focus, because I do think it's so important. So in terms of just like approaching design, like right out of the gate, I very much like Nancy, it's about, those kitchen table conversations is how I always think of it. It's like, well, it used to be kitchen table. Post-COVID, it's more of like the front porch conversations. But I like the kitchen table conversations when you go into the house and like, you even said, like you get a sense of their taste, like, is this going to be someone who wants a curated landscape? Is this someone who's like very, wabi-sabi or rough and ready, or, where are we at with this person? And it really... I always start by asking people to tell me their story. Just tell me your story. Like, tell me your background and how did we arrive here today at this table together? And, and then that leads into what are your goals? But so much of the story educates the goals. And then you also like learn this backstory behind the goals. And a lot of times the goals aren't really the goals. So you're kind of trying to parse out what's what. I used to teach with an architect, and he always talked about the red gazebo fallacy. And someone says, I want a red gazebo. And it's like, do they actually want a red gazebo? What is it that they want? Do they want shade? Do they want like a really do they just love the color red? Do they like that style of architecture? Are they thinking like this like highly lacquered, like expensive, like special piece that they're showing off? Like what actually is the red gazebo? So I always feel like that's just such a useful metaphor where you can like really dig into someone's goals. And, it's more often, it's more often like a plant specific goal that I find out with, certain trees or certain thises or that's, or often I'm like work with a ton of folks. I get a lot of consultations from folks who have just retired and want to become market gardeners. Like that's their jam. They're like, this is what I want to do with my retirement. It's like, I don't know, in 10 years, are you going to want to be on your knees, like cutting those high rotations and, working a salad spinner and, humping your wares to market at 5 a.m? Like I'm not. So, a lot of it is just helping people like get a little past that. Okay, so I hear this goal, but is it because you just like, maybe you're just like needing something new? Are you wanting connection? Are you wanting a legacy, like, to pass on to your kids or your grandkids to come run the farm? Is that what they want? It's really so much of design is human sector and conversations and just digging deep and asking those questions, because a lot of people have the experience of just like kind of going through their lives and making these plans without people really digging into that for them. So like you can really do people a great service. And also it's amazing how many people are just like, oh, no one's really ever asked me what I want before, or, so sometimes just those little things can be really rewarding too. But those kitchen table conversations.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to invite Tonia and Nancy to just come off mute, because y'all are hilarious and I'm going to be chuckling throughout most of this. But yeah, that's where kind of the crossover comes with like, well, are we designers, or are we social workers, or is it a little bit of both? Sometimes therapists, like you have to approach a person and be like, that you're not going to be able to do the same amount of work that you're doing now when you're 75. And that'll be a part of the topic that we'll talk about tomorrow, actually, in the generational land transfer. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. So I have another question for you all, and chime in as you see fit. But how do you talk people out of their goals and their design? How do you bring them to reality of what they are capable of, what the landscape is capable of? Like, what is your gentle approach to saying, I don't think that's a good idea?
Oh my God. Mine's a little like the Flintstones with the like, what's it, the bat, and then like what's that guy's name? Pierce Brosnan, is that the right guy? I'm thinking of the critic who's just like, this is not gonna work, or like, this is gonna work. It's just one or the other. But yeah, it's like, I just come at it like, do you really want this bad scenario? If I feel like it's a bad scenario that they're gearing themselves towards, and then or what are you gonna do when or if? Like, kind of posing it in that question, because it's like, oh, if we're in the debacle, how are we going to respond to the debacle? And then that helps like some of the, oh, but I don't want that. It's really just connecting people with the part of it that they don't want, that you can identify based on your current knowledge set, and that they currently cannot identify based on their current knowledge set. And so helping link those things for them, so that the capacity, like the decision making of yay or nay, is not on you as a designer, it's on the client. But through you as a designer, as your responsibility is to articulate it to the client in such a way that they understand for themselves that it's their own decision, that they don't want that after all, or that they do want something after all, right? That's my 2 cents. Nancy is a beautiful communicator to people. I've seen her in action for years, or I was in SI anything ecosphere. So I'm really interested to hear what you're going to say to that.
I don't think I have much to add. I think that I often find people are they're attracted to something, and then so they want it, and they don't realize their steps or some of the things that they want are really, they're really advanced, and you kind of graduate towards that maybe as you build other pieces. And it's a lot about that metaphor of soil building. There might be certain things you have to do first to get the ground ready for other things to happen. And I'll try to explain it like that, so they don't feel that they're at the, even if they are at the beginning stage, they don't feel overwhelmed as a beginner, or they don't feel that their intelligence or their initiative isn't thwarted by the fact that they're so new. I want to encourage anybody who is doing this to enter. So I try to find ways of doing that, but it happens. It's like 90% of the time. So it's always a conversation that needs to happen. And I never want to discourage anybody who's going at anything full force, because I love people with a lot of energy. So I want to keep them moving, but maybe in a way that's going to work for them a little better than what they think they need to do.
And I think on that note, for so many people, kind of blending what you two are saying, just being able to be that reality check, because people are researching these projects and they're looking at sexy Instagram farms, and they're seeing like nothing but like the sparkle, or like every twice a year someone they follow posts that like, this is what a bad day looks like. But it's like, okay, if you're going to be farming, there's going to be a lot of those, it's just how it is. And I think just helping sort of reconcile, like, okay, this is the reality of a market gardener's life. That's maybe not what you've been led to believe. Like, how realistic does this pattern sound to you? This many hours, this much physical labor. Like, I feel like in permaculture, we're always just talking about patterns and like trying to like break things down into the patterns. Like, does this, if you're going to put your greenhouse like all the way on the other side of the property, and, like how realistic does the pattern of, why don't you walk that once back and forth and time it? And then think about how many times you're going to have to go out there. And do you have that much time in your day? Do you have those many steps in you every single day? or like carrying water to animals. That's another one. I always try to walk people through that pattern. They're like, well, I don't have water access down there yet, but I can carry water for a little bit. And it's like, you absolutely can. And let's walk through what that looks like. Because even if they're still like gung-ho, like, yes, I'm going to do that, to Nancy's point, yeah, cheer them on. And like, let's help them not be shocked at what that reality looks like once they're actually doing it. So yeah, I feel like you can sort of just kind of help lead people, you know, along decision-making paths and just with the best information you can.
I want to mention too that, you know, a lot of design that I work on is usually something that's been going on, you know, someone's living with their landscape and they've been living with their landscape for 10, 15 years, you know, and it's just, and they need to adjust because of health or their kids left or they just have a mess, right? And they've been living with a mess and they're like at wit's end and they're like, oh my gosh. So it's more about retrofitting, and it's not necessarily like this fresh piece of like GMO corn and soy that you get to turn into a food forest. You know, like it's mostly like, this is what I got. Help me. I'm dying here. And so a lot of design to me is like, how do we work? How do we decide what elements already exist and how form more interconnection between them? How do we rework systems that are already there? Because the riches are there and they usually just need to be reworked. And if you have limited time or a limited budget, you need to know what those acupuncture points are in a system. And so mostly what I come in, and I feel like I usually come in when there's a mess and people are like, oh, I've been trying this, you know, I did my, you know, I've had these trainings. I've been doing this for 10 years. And, you know, my partner and I are going to break up unless something happens, you know, like it's just, you kind of get into these kind of situations where you have a whole bunch of elements that are just not quite working together. And I think Tonia and I have been on one job where there was a lot of that and a lot of funding come in, and it looked like they were just dropping presents all over the landscape, and they were completely disconnected. And a lot of those they weren't. There was no systems. There was no flow between anything. It was just plopping across the landscape, and wondering why they're so tired. And I think that, just to realize that not everybody's launching a new project. A lot of people are reworking lived projects.
Yeah. And definitely given the timeline of all the projects that we're doing, that's an incredibly good thing to point out to people in the audience too, that it's kind of going back to something that Robin Welkemer mentioned of like, it's not going to be a blank slate. And even if it's a blank slate corn and soy field, you still have the soil there. So that is going to move us on to the next question. And Nancy, you've been speaking to this kind of throughout already, but like, how do you approach the landscape? I know your specialty is kind of in soils, so I was wondering if you can talk a little more about that.
Well, so I inherited a old, you know, like GMO corn and soy field, and it's the flattest part of the property. And so that's why I wanted to put the kitchen garden, and organic matter was low. I would dig and I'd see, like, you know, psychedelic pools of oil that were from a leaking tractor from years ago. And it was just a mess. So I decided that I was going to work part of that into a kitchen garden. The rest I was going to let, one area I was just going to let it regenerate with tree species, which are the usual kind of like box elder, wild cherry, walnut, some oak. And then I planted into that a little bit. And then I also have an area that I've brush hogged and have been planting and burning in that way. So I've worked with it 3 different ways because I want that diversity of systems in that area. It's probably 3 acres total. So that's the area where I worked really hard on soils and like I said, I'm doing a lot with cover cropping. I chop and drop all the time. My kitchen garden has long aisles between beds that are narrow, and they're dry path walks, and they're with clovers mostly. And as I mow those, I spray them or assay them. I spray them into the beds. So I'm always dropping and heavily mulching and etc. I have a lot of different compost piles. I also work in eco-sanitation. So I work with human manures as well as my animal manures and beddings. And so I have different techniques. I'm working with all those things. And then I usually work with chars as well. Char is seen as kind of I think it's talked about almost like fairy dust. I'm more elven, and I want things a little bit more teched up. So working with char in relationship to my seedlings, or in when I'm trenching, or when I'm planting, doing deep planting with trees is how I work with it. And I char a lot of materials that would be better charred than they would be chipped for mulch, or tossed into another wildlife brush pile.
Excellent.
Or firewood, I have 4 wood stoves. There's always firewood. So deciding where that comes from is where wastes go is probably what is most exciting to me, and it is also, I think, fundamental to soil building. It's kind of brief, but
oh no, I mean, one day for the audience, one day we could have a session on biochar. It is not this PFG. It is like it's complicated fairy dust, but we're gonna just go past that. And I want to ask this question to Tonia and Emilie too. What are the things that you personally look at first in the landscape? So this is kind of taking out maybe a little bit less than like the client's goals for it, but what are you looking for? And what are you designing
I love
around?
that. Yeah. The first thing I'm always looking for is existing plant communities, because they're going to tell me so much more about that landscape than any person can in any amount of time. Just because how things are growing where, it will tell you about topography. It will tell you about how water is moving, whether or not it is puddling. Like, you will get indications through the plant palette of what is going on. And that's where like a lot of my learning was really like catalyzed, is because there are such incredible plant nerds out there. If you hear my dog yawning, that was her saying she doesn't want to hear about that. But there are great plant nerds out there that you can learn from and infer as a designer what those traits or attributes that each plant prefers, how those translate into the plant selection, right? Or the biomimicry of different ecosystems. So that's one of my first things.
What's the plant that comes to mind if you're like, uh-oh, water's pooling there, or uh-oh, it's too dry here? Just to give an example.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you see a bunch of birches, for example, that's going to tell you more than about water. It's about, the indicator of some health that's going on there. Different species beyond trees, like, different insects and frogs, etc. Indicator species, Lepidoptera, butterflies, moths, they're very good indicator species for sites. Anyways, I think that those are some of the things that will tell you where you're at. Whereas if it's a bunch of Phragmites, and Phragmites, if you're not familiar, is this super invasive gnarly grass that's just like all over, right? It's gonna kind of indicate, oh, well, we're in succession here. Like, these are successional weed species that are coming in to kind of get the soil built up, right? And so that might tell you we really need to focus, whereas you have a farm with a bunch of birch trees or whatever, right? And a bunch of Lepidoptera flying around, versus the Phragmites is just taking over half an acre. I don't know, those are maybe a spectrum to draw real quick. And then on the latter half of that, you might focus more on soil building, out competing it, taking it out, getting grazing, maybe select grazing introduction, right? Planting select woody species like willow that can help contain other combative invasives, things like that.
Thank you. Yeah. Emilie, would you like to chime in on this?
Sure. Yeah. I love thinking about plant community stuff. I feel like you could just spend your whole life nerding on that stuff, which would be a life well spent. Yeah, I feel like the low-hanging fruit answer, I'm like landform and water, but the more in general, like someone was talking about blank slate a minute ago, and I feel like the worst like the worst thing to design is just like a blank sheet of paper. Like I'm always like, what are the limitations? I'm always picking up on the limitations immediately, and that stuff I'm always asking folks about right away is like, easements or right of ways, or again, like looking at plant communities, you might find limitations there, compaction, wet sites, like what are these things going to, the landscape's telling us a story, and it's going to kind of ask for certain things sometimes. And I feel like I'm always trying to figure out what is it telling me not to do first. So yeah, I guess just broadly limitations are the thing, or where my mind goes right away.
I think just to add to that, just because I want to complexify this a little bit, really looking at other practices around the land, because your land isn't just like this in a bubble.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Really looking at the commercial, industrial, the agricultural, the social practices outside of the barrier of your property line that would affect that property. And then it also means broader landscape too. So understanding that that the influence of land doesn't stop at property line is really looking beyond that. And so I try to scope out from there and try to show how certain things, like whether it's runoff or encroachment of certain animals or spray or whatever that could be coming in that could influence what you're designing to. So always looking outside of yourself, historically through the landscape and through your immediate neighbors, and is really important.
Yeah, and I want to add in a question just to color this a bit more too, and feel free, because I know you all have clients possibly in the audience, so share what you like. But what has been something that has stood out in your mind as a design challenge, and maybe if you want to take that as a approach with clients, if there's a particular topic, or what stands out to you as a design challenge you keep running into, maybe. Tanya's going, yeah.
I got one. If you want to think it, you're still Emilie. But I think it comes back to me. It keeps coming up, this markets meets ecosystems thing. And like when I first started, I was like, what's a line? Like line schmine, curves or where it's at. And like I still love a curve, I'm always gonna love a curve. But I understand solar, energy distribution in a larger production system might not be served by curvature within the tree row planting all the time, right? Maybe there are instances of that, but that's kind of a healthy tension I think I'm struggling with, in my journey as a designer, now that I'm transitioning from a landscape-based design role, which is a design build role, and the client's looking at me to put in plants that look good and build habitat, and all they have to do is water it until it establishes, and then they don't have to do anything, right? If they don't want to a design role where I'm servicing producers now, and we have to think through a very different set of logistics, than, and a different temporal spectrum a lot of times, right? Compared to that other form of design. So really bridging like, the money in the markets, and do you want to be the market development team and the PR team as well as the harvest team? Do you have that capacity, producer? We want to hold habitat for the absolute foundation of what allows all of this to be held up from the root up, right? From root to tree crop. We have nature that we need to respond to and serve at the end of the day. And a lot of my clients understand that. And so as a designer who needs to make their bottom line be a triple bottom line or whatever, or try to be, right? It's something I'm growing that skill set within myself. I think the larger industry, if you will, or a larger community is trying to find that relationship balance, right? Between money and sustainability in that regard, and ecosystems and habitat.
Totally. I think that's a dance that everyone can relate to on this. Emilie or Nancy, do you have anything outside of the fine balance between market and ecosystems? And it's not a one or the other thing. I think it's a really active balance. But yeah, anything coming to your mind for that?
I just think just understanding these are, you know, as someone who's older, is like these things change over time, both markets and what's trending in markets. Also how ecosystems change, even radically, having, you know, 200-year-old floods that completely, you know, covered my land by 30%. So I was able to break out the kayaks. It was awesome, but it was also kind of like I'm kayaking on my land. It's amazing. But as you know, like these things that are happening are, it's nothing set. It's always moving. You're going to need to reassess. And that's what we have winter for. Because we all know that as soon as March hits, we're busy until just about now. So we can take a breath, and then January is where we lean into how we're going to readdress those things. And I think that needs to be remembered, that design is a constant. It's like self-reflection. It's always something that we can go back to and look at and tweak and move away from certain things and incorporate other things as we ourselves change and markets and landscapes change. I wanted to speak. I was going through, I'm like, where are the questions for the audience? Because that's why we wanted to talk so little. So we left a lot of time for y'all, because I'm really interested in who was out there.
Yeah, we got a couple good ones.
So I will pick up. Richard had a question. Did you find it helpful to speak independently with clients who are partners?
That was a spicy one.
Yeah, I do. And if they're interested enough in having that kind of relationship, because a lot of people are like, oh, we want the designer to come in. It's going to be, you know, and off they go, and we get our thing, and then it's set in stone, and then we rock this. And it doesn't work like that. So if they realize that this is a longer time, that we're going to be pulsing conversations, that things are going to come up in 3 months or 6 months, we schedule conversations just like you would with a healthcare provider. Like, we have these conversations because you have a lived experience of something, or you've made some observations as a season has gone on. Things need to happen, or tensions rise between partners who might work together on something, or might become pretty polarized in how they're addressing a landscape. And so you are. I think it is really important to understand that as a designer, you can get it can be intimate in those harder conversations, and really trying to understand what can you really live with right now, and what are conversations you might need to have, as opposed to come from this headspace. Like, there's too much idea of what needs to happen, or what to be to grow agroecologically, or to be a permaculture practitioner. What does it need to look like? What are the products that I need? What are the badges that I need on my landscape to have something happen? And it's not like that. A healthy relationship is something that's alive and needs to be opened up. Those conversations need to be opened up over time. So
alive and tended, for sure. That was the question that stuck out to me. I was like, ooh, I can't wait to ask you all this. Emilie, I did want to go back if you had anything on your mind about kind of consistent design hurdles that you run into.
I think the biggest tension that I see, at least in our area, I'm in, 7B humid subtropical, and it sure acts like a jungle sometimes. And maintenance, is people not planning for maintenance is something that, when Nancy's saying like coming into a mess, I feel like that's a lot of the kind of mess that I often see. And so within the design process, trying to really work backwards from, okay, we're going to plant nut trees now. And this gets into markets too. You want to plant nut trees now. Okay. So let's think about at maturity. So let's say in 15 years, how much are you going to be harvesting? Is there any infrastructure for that right now? in our area. Like that's 15 years, you're playing the long game. That's great. But like, let's start talking with nut cooperatives and let's start researching grant funding for community processing equipment and getting a group together. And then let's dial back a little, you know, like, so that's the like long trajectory. And then let's look at mid trajectory. And then let's look at just these first 2 or 3 years when you just want to get those trees up and out of those tubes. And how are you going to maintain around that? Do you have animals? Are they going to do the weeding for you? If they're not, again, back to the like patterns and time budget, like, do you have time or the infrastructure or labor force to weed eat? Do you have a powerful enough weed eater for a broad acre? Do you have, you know, the right type of mower for this? Like, what's this going to look like? Since I'm working a lot in silvopasture, that example is very like true to form of the stuff that I'm working through with people quite frequently, but really, really helping people think about maintenance as a part of the design, because when you are doing design, you're also designing in how it will be maintained. So is it going to be nice straight rows? Is it going to be curving rows? Are you trying to like get fancy and put down fabric? And then how are you going to maintain those edges and all of those things? Just helping people understand that deeply embedded into the design is also like your future of maintenance, what that's going to look like for you.
And your sanity, and your future sanity.
Yeah. And you're, you know, if you're hiring neighborhood labor, you know, your high school labor bill or whatever it is. But yeah, maintenance.
Absolutely. And planning for sanity. I like to add that the example you used before was like time yourself walking all the way to the field and back. Like I've never done that because I don't want to know, but I need to know, because when you get to the end of the day and you think, why am I working from sun up to sundown on this? You need to be able to point to, it's like, oh, maybe that part. And it's so hard to see that when you are in the field. And so I'm really grateful for all of you designers to be able to have this like 60,000 foot view and go, oh, that might be your problem. So
I think people sometimes are really good at parsing that out in more like a urban, like 9 to 5 context. It's like, okay, I know how long my commute is. I can double that and know like how much I'm driving each week, but we don't often transfer that over to like other minutia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that leads into a good question from our Zoom host, Sinuan, who's a fellow TSP and actually in Indiana right now. And so this is a question for all speakers. How do you deal with the known and unknowns, or even the unknown unknowns? There are so many different species, perennials, annuals, woody, herbaceous, etc. What do you do in situations when clients ask you about systems or species you're not at all familiar with? They may have an idea that has merit, but you don't have any experience with it, and there's not a lot of info out there about it. Yes, what do you do when you don't know? Unless you guys know everything.
Yeah, right. Well, I think many staff meetings asking for help from colleagues. So I definitely talk to other people. Nancy has taken many calls from me at all times of day, asking for some strange related question to like, what do you think about this? You know, so yeah, talk to others.
I cultivate relationships with practitioners and have for many, many years. And so I usually, if I can't answer it, there's someone that's just a call away that can address that. Or together we can work on something to go at things. But like some of those, you know, not knowing a species, what does it mean to know a species? It's like you can identify it, which I think a lot of people stop at. They're like, I know it's this because that's what it says it is in this book or iNaturalist or whatever. But it's like knowing the species is understanding how the roots occupy the ground, is knowing how it performs over years in a landscape. You know, the culture of that plant itself, if we're talking about plants. So what knowing about something is something that can be opened up. It's very complicated piece. The unknowns. I love that question. That's where I just trust the body. If the head doesn't have an answer, I trust what the body's feeling and understanding in intuiting or sensing in the landscape, and am open to learning through that. But I love that question, the unknown unknowns. I mean, always make room for that we can't know everything and we're not on top of everything, and there's always something outside of our viewfinder.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the questions, anyone. We have a little follow-up in the chat too of having a transition period is key. Not much in nature, us included, responds well to sudden change. And that is that's a response to a question about soil management, which is going to be a little bit longer of a question. So for the person that asked that, I'm going to ask a few more questions before we get there. See, I hope these people are still here. Emilie, did you want to speak to the known unknowns at all?
I mean, I think that y'all did a good job talking about that. And Tonia, it made me think of the piece of writing you did for the description of this. That we were joking about in a set, like a prep session, about something about like, is it necessary to know everything about XYZ? Yeah, and I do love the embracing the unknown, especially when you're working at like a small or a garden scale. And it's funny because sometimes those clients are the people who get like really, really hung up on like every tiny detail. And it's like, even if you plant this, 1 year, 2 year seedling here, you can move it next year if you want to. Like, there's not much that's like permanent. So I feel like there is, I'll say like outside of like a really like strong economic context, I often want to like allow people to just be like a little comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen, or with having a little action over preparedness. I mean, it's all a balance, but like not getting caught in that analysis paralysis and just like waiting years and years to do something because you're so like desirous of getting it exactly right, or you're so worried that you're going to get it wrong. And I'm guilty of doing that too. Like, it takes one to know one. But yeah, I think there's definitely like a spectrum there, and there's kind of a happy place, like sort of in the middle, where you're okay to move forward without knowing every single nuance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like from what I've heard from all of you in our previous talks and talking to designers around here, it seems like you've the mindset of people that want to put trees in the ground tomorrow, or people that are going to kind of hem and haw until I want it to be absolutely perfect. So I'm going to speak to the first group of like, how do you and this is a question for me. I'll get to, we got time. I'll get to a couple more questions from the audience, but like, how do you convince people to slow down? Nancy, you spoke to this in our previous sessions, but like the idea of the benefits that waiting a year to like study your landscape, study your programs. There is nothing, permanent about permanent agriculture, but kind of the importance of putting the wait time in. I have a mentor that says never plant anything within the first year of moving to a property. You need at least a whole year to really understand, because bulbs are hard to move. So.
Yeah. I kind of think I want people to engage in their landscape right away and not come from a heady space and like observe, because they don't even know what they're looking at a lot of times if they're new. And so I want them to start with something, and I usually will kind of phase it in like a seasonal plan. Like, this is what you can do over the winter, and this is where you can engage. Would be a place of engagement. So you get to, because I want to draw them into the landscape through their hands, through their touching of things, through their physical experience of land. So even that principle, in permaculture of like, observe, and then interact, like I think that needs to come hand hand in hand. And I believe in the hands. Like let's return to the hands so that we're not just typing our life away with these. Like let's get the hands involved. And I want so I usually have different things that they can do that's matched with ways that they can observe before they get into some major investment. And the problem comes in to play often when people have a lot of capital. So they have a lot of capital. And so like, yeah, I could just rock this. I have $50,000. I can lay down and get these trees in. I'm going to start my winery or whatever they're doing. And I've seen one of those recently, and it was like, woo, 2 years from now, this is going to be fun to manage. So I think there's something about slowing people down who really are capitalized, that needs to that's a little trickier. But I do believe in engaging landscape straight off in some kind of in various projects.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
And if I could just piggyback off that and kind of keep framing that, I think that Nancy is very good at helping people understand what's good to press the gas pedal on, for lack of a better metaphor, push the chlorophyll pedal on, I don't know, versus what you need to kind of hold on. For example, at my property, she's like, well, you need to get your pasture planted in winter rye, because that's the only thing you can put down still, in red clover. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. I should do that now. You're right. Now is the time to do that. And this was, in October or whatever. And then she's like, well, you might not want to get chickens now because you're going to have to introduce them outside before the deep, winter sets in. But I'm currently raising baby chicks, despite that, information.
In your living room. In your living room.
It's their room. It's their room. But it's like things like that. It's like, if I had listened to her, sure, I'm no regrets. Look, I'm in it. They're going to be in my agroforestry system. In spring, I'll have speckled and colored eggs. It's cool, But I think that one of the things that comes with time as the designer, all that to say, like, as more and more time goes on, I think we all have our own perception about phases of plans and how phasing needs to be used in planning, right?
Definitely.
But not getting in the way of somebody who has huge skills or huge energy around something. Like if they, if I can't do it, that's fine. But if they can do it, let them do it and support them in that process that they'll be able to do because they're excellent machinists or, they have, they grew up with a huge amount of animals. So just let them do it if that's part of their skill set.
Yeah.
And support them.
This is a great lead into a question from Michael Gold in the chat. There are some folks out there who claim to provide advice to landowners in agroforestry spaces, but really do not have the experience. However, the landowners may drink their Kool-Aid. Then you are contacted and disagreed with on advice. How do you deal with this issue? I think what you're getting at, Michael, is how do you deal with landowners that are disagreeing with your all advice? And Michael, feel free to come off of mute if you'd like to ask more specifically.
That's fine. Take it or leave it. This is kind of my viewpoint. Get other viewpoints on it. We all come from different places. I think it's really clear what I'm designing for. So if someone is doing hard production market, I'm not the person to be working with. I'm fine with that. I don't take that personally. And I want people to be able to do what they feel they can do. They need to be resonant with what they're presented with. To accept.
I think I see what his question is getting at is more of like, what happens when you disagree with other folks in the industry as far as like design goes? Maybe not with the client, but like with other people that are in the same space as you.
Healthy debate.
Just the facts, ma'am. The facts and nothing but the facts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Mike jumping in. Yeah. So there are folks out there who are known who, because they have a name, are out giving advice all over the country, and it's not necessarily sound. And I run into it. And it worries me on behalf of the landowners. So it's not an easy thing to tiptoe around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen in any industry. I think my question would be, Michael, how do you deal with that, or like how do you handle that? Like, I think as Tonia put, like it's the facts, but like a lot of this science is very still being researched. I don't want to say it's new. A lot of it is refurbished, but that
gets back to the question that there's a lot of unknowns, and so in a lot of parts of the country, every one of these sessions you hear about a whole bunch of different perennial species that are being recommended in different parts of the country. But in many cases, there's really been no research to find the best cultivars for a particular region, yet people are just headlong plunging into a lot of planting. And that worries me. And, I come from Center for Agroforestry in Columbia, where we've got 25 plus years of looking at certain cultivars where we actually feel confident, and where we don't feel confident, we tell people we don't feel confident. But I see a lot of other people just pell-mell going forward. And I think that the landowner's the one's going to really get crushed 10 years down the road when they don't have quality material.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, there's a point, and I can't find it, but a point of doing something as a team. And so I think some of the contexts I've worked in design have been when there's a larger gathering, and there'll be 3 or 8 people all throwing in, and the design process is longer. It's like a collective design process, and it's to work with a team where we all have different views and ways that we approach landscape, and to have it more of a dialogue, and having the client who has the land hear all those different opinions, or hear the debate. It also comes in when I'm working with soils, as I usually like to do that with other people who are working with soils. Because soils is there are measurements, but there's also a lot of relative ways that we can look at things. And so to have the health of that, again, healthy debate or engaged discussion is really important. So if you can arrange a group to come in and throw down as a team, whether they work as a team in another context or not, is a really, really healthy way of approaching design.
Yeah, I guess the best you can do is to reduce their risk, right? Mm-hmm. If they're well informed.
Definitely. Thank you for the question. I'm going to move on to a question from Forrest. Great name. And this one is directed towards Emilie, but I'm curious where you see the permaculture mindset and agroforestry as a production model overlapping, as well as areas that might have friction, particularly in trying to bring projects to scale. So this is a question on scale for all of you. Where do you see the tension here?
I'm a really terrible audio processor of information. Can you copy that into the bottom of the chat so I can read it? Is that okay?
For sure. I will send you a message right now. And Tonia and Nancy, you're also welcome to chime in for that.
Cool. I think something with scale that keeps coming up in my work, in addition to the markets piece, is the ecosystem piece. So to quickly elaborate on both of those, with markets and scale, you have things like specialty crop production that can have added value through added processing, right? Like elderberry is a great example of that, right? Or aronia. Aronia, nobody's going to buy the berry. They'll buy the jam, and they'll buy it for a better price than what you'd get otherwise. Aronia, a lot of times locally, I've been hearing in the Midwest, people get a better deal, a better yield off of the flower of the elderberry, the elder flower, right? Rather than the actual berry. To be used in syrups and so forth. So you have like some scale considerations within that, right? If your aim is to produce a berry for an added value product versus a first harvest equals product, like in the instance of a flower that doesn't need additional processing, but the caveat with it is that you need to be out there each and every day to get the flower before it turns into the berry, right? In order to actually get it at the right time. That's up to the producer to decide. From an ecological perspective, I think a lot of times people don't think they're making an impact when they are like a little 10-acre farm or under. And I think we echo that a lot in the NRCS, or not NRCS, excuse me, the conservation community as a whole and ecosystem restoration community as a whole. I think we're more concerned with larger swaths of land that may be more in the acreage category of miles rather than, a 10-acre farm. So I think, encouraging people to make a small difference, especially for pollinators, and including different species and stacking in our crop schedules, the species that can benefit pollinators, and really encouraging folks to think about how all these larger geographies are smaller conglomerates of single owned land, right? So if 10 of us who think our contribution means nothing all do it, well, then guess what? It actually made a difference. And on a larger scale, I'll say ecosystem restoration wise, and tying together our keynote speaker for this event, thinking about the ecosystem of the Savanna and what the Savanna Institute is named for. I just want to link a paper I wrote last year. It's a 40-page paper, academically cited, for anybody that's interested in understanding how the Black Oak Savanna that I'm very thankful to be standing in right now outside my window is actually a biocultural remnant of indigenous stewardship for food production. So if you want to check that out, I didn't find a lot of similar academic literature in my work. I just thought people in this crew, I wanted to give a quick, it's not about me, it's about the paper and the fact this doesn't really exist yet. People actually like academically arguing for what we all here know to be true, right? About how indigenous folks have shared, crops with us and throughout the millennia, in addition to fostering very important ecosystems at the same time. So what is the dichotomy to them? It's not really existent within the Savanna biome, right?
And I'll make sure that gets into the message board too. So if you don't feel like reading a 40-page paper after this, you can read it later, because thankfully it's December.
That's right.
Emilie,
that was
Nancy,
awesome, Tonia. Yeah, so thanks for copying that for me. So I don't know that I think that there has to be friction between, permaculture and agroforestry in terms of like overlapping models per se. I think what's foremost on my mind when I'm thinking about agroforestry coming to scale right now is really people working together and working towards cooperatives. Like I was talking about shared equipment earlier, tree nut cooperatives, like that's where I see potential for at least permaculture thinking to sort of like shine in agroforestry, because it's really about whole systems and really about like human sector and how do we weave all that together to create like a sustainable and regenerative, beyond sustainable, regenerative reality. And so, the like top of the heap in my idea pile is definitely just thinking about like cooperatives and people working together with tree products, because they all seem to require some specialist equipment and that stuff's all really expensive, and we don't necessarily need big monocrops of it everywhere. But yeah, we could use 10-acre farms in my area growing elderberry and using shared equipment and using shared buyers and utilizing some sort of aggregation. So I guess that's my quick answer. I know that we're nearing the end, so I'm going to quiet my voice because I'm going to see if anyone else wants to speak.
I think that was a great analogy. Yeah, it's just a bigger scale, and like definitely stick around to the end on Friday. Steve Gabriel is doing a really incredible panel on kind of his work in New England right now in the Northeast, on how they're doing this cooperative planning. As we put the plants in the ground, we are figuring out how to cooperatively process and market and sell, and working together that way. Okay, we have a few more questions if you want to stick around for them. This is from Kelda. Any tips on being the designer but not the installer? I've learned that for public projects, I need to ask how install is happening first before doing the design, and maybe say no sometimes because the community will do it without a budget for me to guide. The install is often a mess. Do you guys have any experience in especially working on public projects in this?
I don't do anything that I don't also do the install or manage the install in, period.
Okay.
Nice. That's a really good way to avoid a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but I know from my time in landscape architecture at U of I just got my graduate degree last year. I learned from them that typically within the field of landscape architecture, when you're a designer issuing something to a contractor to actually get it put in, right, and you're exclusively on the design end, as you said, you have to include your notes about the install on the plan itself. So if you've made a map, you have to write the notes of how you want things done very specifically in like disgusting level of detail that you think is like maybe redundant and somewhat, I mean, like it's a little extra, like, really, do I need to say that? Yes, you need to say it if you want it installed that way. And then actually what I learned is that when that goes to bid and is accepted, it actually becomes part of the contract. So if they don't plant in what you told them on that plan to plant in, how you specified to do it, then you can hold them accountable to go back and fix it. And that's a very valuable, I think, factor for consideration for anybody who is designing and is issuing a public bid or some type of thing where you're not the actual implementer. You need to make sure that you put it in writing on the plan itself, the details that will be forgotten and or misinterpreted.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. We have a couple more minutes left. A couple of these questions are a little bit bigger than we'll have time for, but the one that I passed over was from Austin Camille, curious to hear more about how to approach design plus soil regeneration, specifically on larger tracts of land, both in terms of practical order of operations and also perhaps what working on these larger ecosystems feels like for you. And for context, their family is on 40 acres in South Texas, trying to restore the land after years of mismanagement. So perhaps we'd have time. This seems like a question maybe for Nancy of where do you start?
I mean, I think that's where I'm really excited. I left a career of like working in backyards and rooftops and front yards and gardens that were whatever, up to a quarter acre. And so to work in landscape is really the dream. And I think it just connects to larger systems. So more than ever in larger systems is really looking at where it's placed in the region, how it's situated within larger landscape, and understanding that those areas in your landscape are going to have particular things that call to them. Like I talked about that management of 3 acres at the beginning, and I have different management strategies because I wanted different things to happen through that area. But like I have 10 acres of wetland full of reed canary grass that floods every spring with spring melt, and then also with can be really wet with heavy rains. What I do there for soils is very different than what I do through the sloped, highly sloped systems I have, or in flat areas where I'm regenerating soil. So what is the history of that use? What do I need to do to address that? But also how are these areas of management so different across the landscape? So unless you have something flat and raised, which land is not, you're going to have differentiations, even just in soil type through that area, and different aspects of hydrology or slope that come into play. So start mapping out by management area, or what you see as like general dynamics that are happening in those areas, and then find out what your soils approach could be and how they're going to be different in those areas. So really scoping out and looking at that before you get into tossing compost everywhere, of compost of of unknown quality everywhere. So slow down and really scope out like a bird and start understanding those pieces. And that's where it gets really exciting, because then you're really tapped into larger ecosystem dynamics. That's a big learning, and it's very exciting.
Excellent. And I think I'm going to cut us off at that. Thank you so much, Emilie and Tonia and Nancy, for joining us today. We are at 5:30, and I will let everyone retire from the Zoom screen for the evening. I will see everyone back here in some capacity at 9 a.m. Central Time. We have 2 concurrent sessions happening at that time. Up from the Roots from Interlaced Commons. Really wonderful session that I'm looking forward to. And then also non-food agroforestry crops, also a great panel. So pick which one you'd like. I was going to say poison, but neither of them are poison. And thank you so much for the first day of PFG. We will see you back here tomorrow. Thanks again, panelists.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Great to be in community with y'all.
You too.
Likewise. Y'all are amazing. Thank you.